All right, good morning, those of you that are joining us. We're just going to take another few seconds to let everyone get brought in from the waiting room. So just be an awkward few seconds of silence. And if you're joining us, we're going to mute you, or if you could help us out, mute yourself. This meeting forum doesn't automatically mute you. So if you could help us with that, be great. We'll have time at the end for questions. Okay, it looks like we slowed down from allowing or moving people in from the waiting room, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Ray Peppley, and I am a college and career counselor in very gray, cloudy Meridian, Idaho. I am at a public high school, and I am part of the PNACAC Professional Development Committee. And so my co-host is Brittany Smith, and she's with the University of Montana. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here today, but on the other side of your screen that you can't see is someone helping behind the scenes, and that's Martha Wilson with the University of Puget Sound. So she's letting you all in from the waiting room, and we appreciate her so much. She's wonderful. So thank you, Martha, on the other side. Today, thank you for joining us. I hope you're excited as I am to hear more about our topic. So our topic is the WUE, the Western Undergrad Exchange, and how that can benefit our students. Apologies to those of you who noticed in our flyers that went out or our announcements that it said the WUE is the Western University Exchange. That's not correct. It's actually the Western Undergrad Exchange. Sorry for that error. You probably joined us thinking, do they even know what they're talking about? But we do. I'm sorry about that. We do. So we have two awesome presenters with us today. I've seen them present before. Just so impressed by them, and I think you will be as well. So we have Palmer Muntz is with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and he's a regional based out of the Pacific Northwest. And then we also have Adrienne Loveland, who is with the University of Wyoming, the other UW, as we just talked about this morning. And she is based out of Denver, though, but she's here to help us, and we appreciate her. Before I turn the reins over to them, because they have so much to share, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. The first one being, this is being recorded, and it'll be sent out to everyone tomorrow or maybe Monday. And also, if you have any friends or coworkers asking about the recording, you do have to sign up and register for these in order to get a copy of the recording. So encourage your peers to register so they can get copies if they weren't able to meet with us today. The other thing is I know if you're like me and you're in high school and things can happen, and you do need to leave early, just know that you'll get a copy of the entire recording. The next thing is we're going to save time at the end for questions. So if you could just kind of hold tight, and then we'll probably have 15 to 20 minutes at the end to answer questions. And I think that's it. I think we're ready to turn it over to Adrienne and Palmer.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray.
It's
good to be with you all today. Exciting to see folks kind of stream in when you're presenting. You always kind of wonder, how many people are going to show up and be interested. Adrienne and I thought we would start by just introducing ourselves a little bit so you know our background. Again, my name's Palmer Muntz, and as Ray said, I'm with University of Alaska Fairbanks. Just this week celebrating 7 years with UAF. I've been a part of PNACAC for many, many years. I've been in admissions. I started in 1984. I was first introduced to the Western Undergraduate Exchange when I was at Oregon Institute of Technology. I was there for 7 years as well. And while I was with UAF, had the privilege of serving PNACAC as president. So that's a little bit of my background. Adrienne, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. And truly, thank you all so very much for your time this morning. Palmer and I love talking about WUE. We jokingly have seen each other at fairs and talk about this subject a lot. So we're really excited to share our knowledge on this topic. But my name's Adrienne Loveland. I'm the Assistant Director of Admission for the University of Wyoming. I was joking with Martha. Her and I are sort of unicorns. I've only been with the University of Wyoming for 20 plus years. And I have been a member of PNACAC, I think, for the majority of those years, because the Pacific Northwest has always been my territory. I am pretty active in PNACAC, but I'm very involved with RMACAC. I too served through the president cycle and survived. And a good friend of mine, Betsy Cohen, is your president now, who was from Wyoming. So I feel like I'm a part of that president cycle with PNACAC again too. So thank you all so much for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. So Palmer and I love to start this conversation, and you as high school counselors and IECs, you know there are so many options across the United States, and this is a good thing. You know, we can't emphasize enough that to our students and to your students that they're getting in somewhere. There is so many opportunities, so many possibilities. So we want to know that there is a lot, and for you, we know sort of trimming down that funnel to find the right fit can be interesting, to say the least, but also a really fun process. So I know that you know the out-of-state advantages, but in case you need some talking points for your students, you know, we always kind of hone in on the ability or the availability of less impacted majors. As you know, nursing is always a big one, computer science. So looking outside the four walls of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, etc., there are some other options, so that if they are interested in that, it might not just be right local, but maybe perhaps a little farther away. Also, there's going to be some available programs out of state. You know, in our landlocked states, we always talk about the coast. If you're looking at marine biology and some of those really phenomenal degree programs that only the coast can offer, but that's true with those landlocked states. If you think of agriculture, if you think of some of the turf management programs, and looking inward a lot of times can provide quite a few different options for your students and some unique things. We do have specialized programs such as an outdoor leadership or a rangeland ecology watershed management. Perhaps they want to do some type of research with a specific animal. If they want to work with bighorn sheep, if they want to work with a river otter. So you can see where this is going, and you as high school counselors know this. Also, the culture is a really big piece that we promote to the students. And if you need talking points, again, if they want that SEC experience with crawfish boils and big football game day Saturdays, there's a place for that. If they want to hike peaks and 14ers all day long, there's a place for that too. And of course, the independence piece. I think that this is a huge advantage of looking out of state. But the other one would definitely be the affordability. You know, we say this all the time, but we can't say it enough. We want your students. And we know that the dangling carrot is to make sure that it's an affordable option for these other 6 things to be impactful in their college process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Palmer, who's going to kind of hit on that a little more.
Yeah. So we have a leading question here. You know, fact or fiction? Does it always cost more to attend college out of state? And obviously, you know where we're going with this. Not always. You know, many universities, many colleges have special scholarships, especially to attract non-resident students. Some schools will actually offer in-state tuition to certain groups. For example, a lot of you probably know Eastern Oregon University. If you are a student from Washington or Idaho, you're eligible for in-state tuition. I believe in South Dakota, if you're from any of the bordering states for South Dakota, you're eligible for in-state tuition. So again, doesn't always cost more. And then of course, many colleges, many universities have merit-based scholarships, need-based grants or scholarships. I also like to mention to students, the cost of living in certain parts of the country can factor into this. I think for our, you know, high school juniors who have never lived anywhere except Seattle, They think that's what everything costs, and might be shocked to find that in certain parts of the South or in the Midwest, things are much more reasonable. And that can then impact the cost of the college, the cost of getting an apartment off campus, and so on. And that can factor into making things more affordable. And then, of course, the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We all just call it WUE because Western Undergraduate Exchange is way too many syllables. And so we want to walk you through a little bit of what WUE is, what it isn't, how to help your students explore this opportunity.
And one of the things Palmer and I did is we tried to take all the rumors, all the assumptions that we've heard over the years about WUE and put them into categories of what truly WUE is and what it is not. If nothing else, this is a really great slide so that if your students come to you and say, oh man, I heard blah, 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 you can say, that's not quite accurate, but let me tell you what WUE really does stand for and how it's applicable. So WUE is a part of WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission of Higher Education. This can start to mucky
Again,
up
way
the
too
waters.
many syllables, right?
Totally, Palmer. What is it with higher ed and syllables? We love it. Acronyms. So I've always seen students are like, I see this WICHE thing, and you're like, yeah, you're on the right track. So I always describe it to students as kind of the governing body of WUE. So they're at the hierarchy and they just make sure all the participants in WUE states are following the protocol and try to make it so it's a level playing field, and that some of the things that WUE stands for is applied at each of these participating schools. And the schools that like to ride on that coattail or pretend that they're WUE are in fact not, so that they do protect the student. For us in higher ed and in the counseling side, I always say this to counselors, it's like NACAC over the other ACACs. So good or bad example, if that helps you put that picture in your mind, that is what WICHE stands for. It is also the website that Palmer's going to go through in a little bit in this presentation. So if you give WUE a quick Google and see WICHE pop up, you're not going to start eating Tums. You're going to realize that is in fact an important piece of WUE. WUE, regardless of how the state applies it, offers it, etc., what WUE stands for is 150% or 1.5 times of that institution's in-state rate. So it's going to be the lying thing that if you know it's WUE, that's the amount, that is what it's going to be. Also, just to give you an idea.
Let me interrupt here, for instance, and of course, there's always exceptions to everything, right? And so I think one thing I've noticed is it's going to be no more than 1.5 times resident tuition. In doing some research, for instance, for this presentation, I was looking at Washington State University in Pullman. And what I found is what they're doing is they offer basically a $12,000 scholarship to WUE recipients. The $12,000 scholarship actually represents a larger discount than the 150% of tuition. And then some students with higher GPAs are actually eligible for a $15,000 scholarship. So it's worth at least 1.5 times tuition in terms of where you end up. Sorry, Adrienne, go ahead.
No, you're fine, Palmer. And this I think is a really important point when WUE, and you're going to hear both Palmer and I talk about this, that although there are these governing regulations on it, it's so important that you talk to the individual institution, because as this presentation goes on, you're going to see that we all are different. And we jokingly say that we keep it spicy, and in fact, we genuinely keep it spicy. So there is not going to be a cookie cutter method to WUE. So I think Palmer just kind of identified a really important point of making sure that you talk to the specific institutions that your students are looking into or relying on for that process or that scholarship package, to make sure you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. The WUE is applicable to both 2- and 4-year institutions. They are going to be different. When Palmer and I were putting this together, a thing that we started to notice was that how different it is with the transfer process. So if you have a student starting at a 2-year institution, it's not always a guarantee that because they got WUE at said institution, 2-year community college, that it will be also given at that 4-year institution they transfer for. It doesn't always transfer. Some institutions it does, but that's a really good thing to plant that seed into your students, knowing that don't rely on this to be the 4-year. You got it for the 2-year, which is awesome. Let's celebrate that, but look into the process and what is necessary for the 4-year that you're looking to get a pathway to. So those are the things WUE 100% is. What WUE is not, it is not in-state tuition. We get this a lot. Palmer and I battled this a lot throughout our career with students, with families. WUE is never in-state tuition. That is a very different thing. WUE is also not guaranteed or automatic. Now, the little disclaimer to this is there are some institutions that if you apply to their school, you get WUE, or it's automatically renewed. We try to put this out there so that you don't make that assumption and assume that every single institution operates that way. Again, Palmer's going to show you some very different WUE application requirements in a little bit so that you'll see how this comes to fruition. But we like to tell people, do not assume it's guaranteed or automatic, because so many of us do have other stipulations to qualify for this scholarship. The other thing that it is not is reciprocity. This is an easy one to get confused because it sounds fun. A lot of times there's some very complex definitions of what reciprocity is. So I get it. It's a very easy thing to assume WUE quantifies reciprocity. Reciprocity, a good example is New Mexico. There's a couple colleges there that if you send a student and New Mexico sends a student, there is reciprocity because they are usually getting in-state tuition. So since WUE is not in-state, it is not a reciprocity program. The other thing is to really pay attention and help guide your students is that WUE can be major specific. We're going to show you some examples of that later, but there are some institutions that you can be any major except nursing or pharmacy, or we're only going to offer it to students who are in an undersubscribed major at our institution, and that is it. So you want to make sure that you know that, because of course our students are always looking at multiple different degrees, and also they change majors, right? So if a student goes in for a certain major and then switches, that WUE can no longer be applicable to their tuition and fees. So just that little bit of guidance, that seed to plant in their mind. If you're not sure what major you want to go into, but WUE is important to you, let's look at a school that there are not those restrictions. I think this is another important point. WUE, if you go to an institution with the WUE, that time with WUE does not count towards your residency. So a good example of this, is a Utah school where they have some leniency with their in-state requirements. However, if you come to them with WUE, that time is not counted towards their in-state requirement to become an in-state student.
And so in some cases, you may want to have a careful conversation about declining WUE and paying non-resident tuition in order to then be eligible for resident tuition after a certain period of time. That's a really careful conversation to have. And you probably want to include someone from the school in question to make sure you don't misstep. So,
because we all know the affordability piece of the college search is extremely important. It's that piece that makes a big difference. So that guidance is extremely important. And I think the fun, spicy part of WUE is not every school in every WUE state participates. It is up to us if we want to participate or not. So, or University of Oregon is a good example. They are not a WUE school. But here is a great visual of all the 15 Western states and territories that offer and participate in WUE. So you just want to make sure the schools you're looking at are schools that offer WUE. Of course, this is only a public institution program. Private institutions don't have in-state, out-of-state. So we were just talking to Martha about at Puget Sound. She's like, I get asked about it all the time. I'm like, I bet you do. So just to drive home that part for Martha's sake, it is only those public institutions, and not all of us are participants in the WUE program. So I'm visual. I assume everybody else is visual. So to give you an idea of how this works, you're going to take that in-state rate at the specific college times the 1.5 times, or 150%, and that will give you the WUE rate. That WUE rate is what's going to come off of the out-of-state tuition. So we just keeping it on that theme of spicy. This can also trip students up. They see that WUE rate and they're like, sweet, that's what I'm paying. And it's like, well, that's essentially your scholarship amount. And so on the next slide, we do give you an actual example. And sometimes having families and students see how this math works helps them a lot. And we actually are going to show you with some specific schools what that amount equates to, that 150%. So you can see with all of these different institutions varying on their in-state rate, what the WUE rate equates to. So it ranges. Again, this is that important piece of WUE. We're all a smidge different because WUE doesn't stand for a one quantified rate. It's that variable with the in-state piece that you'll calculate and get exactly this, what they're going to offer you for WUE. On the next slide, we actually give you, I love this slide. This is Palmer, so a huge shout out to him. But this is taking that tuition and fees minus the WUE rate, and this is what you would pay at all of these institutions.
Well, and so sometimes we get caught up on this slide. Oh, look, I saved $15,000 or I saved $17,000. Really, the main point is what's the cost afterwards? Because the percentage of, well, here's a really extreme example I just uncovered the other day. And again, going back to South Dakota. In South Dakota, non-resident tuition is actually less than what WUE would be. So even though the 6 universities in South Dakota are all a part of WUE, the students actually pay non-resident tuition at 5 of the 6 because non-resident tuition is less than 1.5 times resident tuition. And at Black Hills State University, I looked it up, WUE tuition actually saves $500 versus non-resident tuition. So we often talk about WUE will save you $10,000 to $15,000 to $16,000. True, but really the bottom line is, what's your cost going to be after WUE? So.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point. It kind of goes back to making sure that when we're having that financial conversation with students, that we're doing that deep dive into, well, this is really what it's going to cost you. And this is really what it's going to look like. Again, going back to the previous piece about the assumptions of WUE, oftentimes people just assume with WUE, everything's going to be so much cheaper and they're going to go for almost free. It is still a magnificent program, and it can still help us so much with tuition, the out-of-state piece, and be a great discount. But we want to make sure we're as transparent as possible on the collegiate side, because there's nothing worse than a student in April in tears because they assumed they were getting one thing and they're actually getting another. So I'll turn it back over to you, Palmer.
Yeah. So again, one of the mysteries, as Adrienne kind of mentioned, is, we talk about, WUE is offered in all these Western states by over 160 different colleges and universities. But there are more than 160 public colleges and universities in these states and territories. So one of the frustrations students can run into is which schools participate in WUE. And in fact, what I tell students when I'm talking to them in schools is as you're window shopping for colleges, when you're going to a college fair, anytime you talk to a school in another state, just go ahead and ask them, do you offer WUE? And then we'll get into this some more, but then the next question after that, when they say yes, is how do I get WUE specifically? But let me help you with identifying which schools, where those 160 schools are, okay? So if you go to the WICHE website, www.wiche.edu/WUE, you'll find, first of all, a screen like this that has an explanation of WUE, similar to what we're going through today. By the way, this QR code takes you here to that page. But then if you glance over to the left side, you'll see the WUE Savings Finder. And if you click on that, it takes you to what is actually, it's a college search engine. And here, you may be talking with a student who says, I've always wanted to study in Alaska. What schools in Alaska, are part of WUE? You can search that way. You'll also notice that on the left side, it's possible to search by the program or major that the student might be interested in. I will say this, just a little bit of a caveat. This is helpful, very helpful. But when you get to, when you search on this, you're going to see just an overwhelming list of college programs. And so two cautions I would have. One is sometimes schools will have a different name for a program than what you're looking for. I don't even know if this is the case, but for instance, at Oregon Institute of Technology, when I was there, they had a program in applied management. So if you search on business, I'm not sure if you would see this applied management program that might be perfectly acceptable for what that student's wanting to do. The other thing I would say is, I believe the WICHE website, this database, I think gets updated once a year. Things do change from time to time. And so that's where we lead into something that Adrienne mentioned earlier. Check each school's policy on their website. And so one of the things that I've been doing the last few days to get ready for this presentation is just very simply typing in the name of the university, WUE, and almost without exception, the first Google search result is that school's WUE webpage, where you can read their policies, then click around, see what majors are offered, and so on.
And I think another, to hone in on Palmer's piece about the major, oftentimes students will put in like marketing, but a school may call it digital marketing and it won't come up. So if you are so knowledgeable that when you're like, well, I know University of Wyoming has in marketing, but and they don't say anything about exclusions, call us. Hands down, I think every admissions rep across the country welcomes that phone call so that we don't have an upset student or a disappointed student later on. So we welcome that, and please double check with us.
Adrienne, I think this is your slide, actually. Is that right? Or was I doing this one?
It is. I love talking. So with that piece, we get students often ask us, they're like, well, I just want to fill out a WUE application so that wherever I go, they'll just get it. There is not one. There is not on that WICHE website. You will never find the universal general WUE application. It is dependent upon school, and Palmer will go through that in just a moment. So when you apply to WUE, just know that a lot of schools do use it as a merit scholarship. So if they talk about their scholarship process and WUE is mentioned during that, that's very typical. We get some schools that say we have our scholarship package and then there's WUE. That's okay too. The lingo that they use to describe how they apply WUE to your tuition and fees and total cost is going to depend on the institution. So don't feel intimidated by that, or, oh, wow, they're not following WICHE rules. There's no guideline on that. It can be considered a scholarship or not. So when you're applying for the WUE scholarship, know that everybody's going to be a smidge different because you don't have enough to do. We thought we'd add some more things on it for WUE. There are some schools that have early deadlines. December 1st is a big one. If you're interested in that, you need to apply to the institution. And then of course, if they have additional requirements for WUE, that has to be completed by that point as well. There are some institutions that do have that first come, first serve. We only offer 25. So the first 25, get it. And so you just want to be aware of those. There's not many institutions that offer that, but those that do, there's no gray area in exceptions or appeals for that. So you want to know, again, the separate WUE application will be school specific, and they will lay out all those directions and the processes for those applications. Some schools are going to have a minimum ACT, SAT score. We're still dealing with that, and a GPA and/or. There are some schools that you just need to apply to the institution, like I had said earlier, and that's okay too. We're all a little different in that way. It does depend on what our board of trustees and vice presidents have to say. So please know it is above our pay grade. For Palmer and I, we would be just handing it out like candy if we could, but we do have to keep the lights on at our institution. So that's why we're a little different. The limitations based on major, you'll be ready for that now, and you know that. There could be also, if they don't have WUE, they may have other scholarships, or they may have WUE and scholarships if the WUE has some requirements such as GPA or test scores. There could be still additional scholarships. So you want to ask about that so that you don't feel, or your students don't feel like they're not going to get anything because they don't.
Yeah. And an example that comes to mind for me on this is Oregon State University,
Yeah.
where WUE is relatively competitive. And so students may think, oh, I didn't get WUE, I can't afford to go there. And yet OSU has some non-resident scholarships that are frankly pretty close to WUE, not quite WUE. So students don't have to give up on a school simply because they don't get offered the Western Undergraduate Exchange.
And there are some schools, there's not a lot of them, but that you can apply for it your sophomore year versus your freshman year. So there's not a lot. There's just a few, and I was trying to race through my notes to find it, and of course I couldn't in time to speak. So, but there is some, and they'll let you know, and those could be a little more difficult to get because you're just looking at the college grades, but an alternative. And we mentioned this earlier, and the WUE is and WUE's not. You can't be on WUE. It's not a good idea to accept that, but hope that you become an in-state resident because of those regulations on in-state residency processes. So be careful of that as well.
Yeah, we're kind of saying, just be grateful you got WUE now. Don't try and wheedle out something even more. And there are occasional exceptions, at UAF. You can come in as a WUE student, and then if you marry an active duty service member, you become eligible for in-state tuition. We'll allow you to switch in that case. But we wanted to give you some specific examples. Now, let me have a caveat here, just to cover my butt. I did research. We did research on these. We don't work for these schools. We might have gotten some detail wrong. Okay. But I think these are relatively reliable. But just to see the range that you could be dealing with. At University of Montana, a 3.9 GPA is required for WUE, or they do offer some WUE based on other academic qualifications. So a student below a 3.9 might still be considered. You need to apply for admission by June 30th. There's no separate WUE application. Meanwhile, their sister school, Montana State University, they only require a 3.0 GPA. It must be so much easier to get WUE there. I don't know if it is or not, okay? It's highly competitive. There's if I remember correctly, I believe they noted on their website that they offer approximately 1,000 WUEs a year, okay? You need to apply by January 6th there, and they have a separate WUE application with an essay that the student needs to write. Then I don't know if you've heard of this school, University of Wyoming, UW. University of Wyoming is actually one of the outliers. Adrienne, I'll speak for you. You can interrupt me, but one of the outliers in that they look at both SAT and or ACT and the grade point average. But there's no separate application. Do you want to speak to yourself at all there, Adrienne, or just
Yeah,
let me
sure.
move on?
And so, and what's great about it though, is we get a lot of students, even in the Pacific Northwest, that were like, well, I didn't take a test score. And we allow them up to May 1st to resubmit grades and test scores. So it's not a, oh gosh, you applied and this is what you had and you don't qualify and you're done. It's, hey, if you get that test score by May 1st, we even allow them to take the April date, which will not get us those test scores by April or May 1st. We'll look at them if they've committed to the institution. So we work with them, but we're also one of those schools that if they don't get WUE, we have a brown and gold commitment. So there is the potential to get financing with or without WUE. So yeah.
Continue. Thanks. Continue on Hawaii Hilo, 3.0 GPA, no deadline. There is a separate WUE application you need to submit. And then at University of Alaska Fairbanks, we award WUE to every student from a WUE state. There's no deadline. But then here's this little thing here. Is there a separate application? Not usually. What the heck does that mean? Well, if you fill out our institutional application, there's a WUE question embedded. Do you want WUE? Yes, you get it. But what if you do the Common App? We don't have a question like that in the Common App. So anyone who does Common App, we have to ask them to do a separate WUE application, which really consists of, this is where I live, please give me WUE. Here's a copy of my driver's license. But it's an acknowledgement. The reason we do that is there's an acknowledgement there. I understand I can't use WUE and then try and gain residency. So it's just a way for us to manage this a little bit better. Some other examples of limitations and requirements and so on. At Boise State University, you can get WUE for all majors except for these limited numbers and for their online programs. You'll see a lot of schools that don't offer WUE for their online degrees. At Oregon Tech, which happens to be a place that my high school senior right now is looking at, they offer it for all the majors except for medical imaging, medical lab science, dental hygiene, and paramedicine. Guess what my daughter wants to major in? Yeah, okay. Then we all love to make fun of University of Arizona because they're part of WUE, but only for two majors, mining engineering and natural resources. So I always just have fun with my colleagues at Arizona. Like, I bet you love it when students come and ask about WUE. So University of Wyoming makes WUE available for all their majors. University of Alaska Fairbanks, again, we offer it for all our majors, including all of our 1- and 2-year degree programs as well. So just a really wide range that muddies the water, but is just something to be aware of. And then one kind of final question that we'll throw into the mix for students to ask, and that is to ask if they can stack other scholarships with WUE. And the policies on this, again, range widely. I think at a number of schools, there's a sense of, hey, this is our largest scholarship or our largest tuition discount. If we offer it to you, say, thank you very much, glad to have it. Yet at other schools, there may be academic scholarships that can be added on, and that can make a pretty big difference in terms of affordability for students. So don't assume one size, if there's a theme to this whole presentation, don't assume one size fits all for like anything. And so with that, hopefully that was helpful for you. I think we have a little bit of time for questions if there are some. So, and we don't know it all. I'm kind of nervous to have people ask questions, but hopefully we can provide some clarity if there's some questions, Ray.
And one more thing I wanted to add to is that at some institutions, there are requirements to keep WUE. So
Yeah.
you're,
Yeah.
you know, you're a great student. We've given it to you, but while you're here, we need to have you be an active participant in your education. So we also try to motivate them with, in order to keep WUE, you need to maintain a 3.0, or you have to be in good academic standing within your college, or fill in the blank. But, and that's not true at every school. So to Palmer's point, each is going to be a little different, but it is another question to fuel your students with, so that when they're looking and researching WUE schools, they have a pocket of questions that they can ask, so that they feel confident with knowing how WUE is applicable to each school they're interested in.
That's great. Great. Yeah, there's one question so far. Great question. Thank you so much for these resources. I'm on the WICHE website now, and I see that San Jose State lists 0 under the WUE tuition column. However, when I click on San Jose's name and navigate to their WICHE page, it says that WUE is over $9,000. See that some other schools also have a discrepancy, but not as drastic as San Jose's. Any chance you can explain that discrepancy?
Nope.
I feel like that's what Palmer was talking about, how the WUE or the WICHE, you know, updates once a year. And probably what happened is they got no information from San Jose. And so they put a goose egg in there and thought, so it's probably just an error. So thanks for pointing that out and doing that. I would definitely touch base with San Jose State for your student and be like, what the hell? Is it 0? That's what we're cheering for. Or is it 9,000? Just to clarify, because that's very different.
I do think one of the things that caught my eye, you know, of course, none of the UCs, as far as I know, none of the UCs are a part of the WUE program, but a number of the Cal States are. And actually, with WUE, their cost for tuition and fees, in many cases, is very reasonable. So for students who, you know, want to go south, they have that opportunity. Or University of New Mexico, I noticed, they only require a 2.8 GPA for WUE, but if you have a 3.0, they actually give you in-state tuition. So again, the opportunities for kids to raise their horizons, and you know, maybe they need a fresh start. They want that independence. This can be, really stating a super obvious thing too, though. As they go out of state, if they're eligible for in-state state grants or scholarships, that will be a loss to them. And so I think for your really needy students, they're still maybe going to run into some barriers cost-wise when they want to go outside of the state. You know, even if someone gives them in-state tuition, if they've just lost their college-bound scholarship from the state, that's a huge gap.
Comment that Vanessa thinks that UC Merced is part of WUE.
Thanks. I had this feeling there was like one of them. And then as soon as I said, I'm like, I think I just screwed up.
Yeah, but they also said we should check just to make sure.
Yeah. There is a handful of UCs that are a part of it, but it's not going to be your big ones. So yeah, it's important to check on that.
On the WICHE website, you can print out a list of all participating schools. And I'm a paper guy, so I like just being able to look at a list. And a number, I would say close to half of the schools that are part of WUE are community colleges. It's definitely over a third. I counted and now I can't remember how many. So.
Yeah, we don't, no other questions yet, unless people are thinking about their questions right now, maybe.
We covered it all, man.
I know.
Such a good job. Yeah, so interesting. Wait a minute, see if we have any others. Yeah.
We're good, huh?
Yeah.
And I think just the one takeaway that Palmer and I hope that you take is that, you know, WUE is a really great, viable option, but please touch base with the school. We're happy to help.
There was a question, do we know of specific schools where it's not stackable? And I'm checking some of my notes from what I was checking today. I don't think I actually made a note of that. I definitely saw schools where it was not stackable. But could I give you a name right now? I'm going to say no because I'm looking at my cheat sheet.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever run across any, but doesn't mean there isn't one out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what schools will often do, though, is even when the scholarships are stackable, for obvious reasons, you're going to see the amounts will vary depending on the residency status.
Mhm.
Not always true, but I think that's pretty common. So a non-resident might be eligible for a $10,000 scholarship, while a WUE student would get a $7,000 scholarship, and a resident might get $5,000 for the same thing.
Mhm.
Well, I think if anyone has any questions that you think of later, Palmer and Adrienne, tell me if this is
We're available,
okay, but can they,
absolutely.
can I send
Totally.
questions on to you? That's so
Please.
sweet. Thank you. Yeah, so if you guys think of anything later, send your question to the PNACAC email, the PD email, and I can forward those questions on to Adrienne
Yeah.
and Palmer. Oh, all right.
Happy to.
I appreciate you guys. That was so, and you're just so lovely. Your presentations, you both are so upbeat. I love it. This makes me happy.
Take
Yeah,
it well.
you do.
Good.
You guys are awesome. Yes.
Thanks for letting us come.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So thank you both. Appreciate both of you. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.